An update on our mission to the Sun. Preparations continue for Orion's upcoming flight test. And a science chat about two upcoming out-of-this-world encounters. A few of the stories to tell you about this week at NASA. Signals from our Parker Solar Probe indicate the spacecraft is alive and well after skimming by the Sun at just 15 million miles from our star's surface. A status beacon sent on November 7th indicates all instruments are running and collecting science data. Parker will study the Sun's corona to solve long-standing mysteries and should help improve forecasts of space weather, which can affect spacecraft and astronauts in orbit, as well as communications on Earth. Our Kennedy Space Center in Florida received the European Service Module for our Orion spacecraft from Germany on November 6th. The service module will propel, power, and cool Orion during Exploration Mission 1, Orion's first uncrewed flight test with our Space Launch System rocket that will demonstrate our capability to extend human existence to the Moon and beyond. NASA and the European Space Agency will participate in a November 16th event at Kennedy to mark the arrival of the service module. That event will air live on NASA television and the agency's website at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We teamed with the U.S. Navy and others for the 7th in a series of tests off the California coast to verify and validate procedures and hardware needed to recover Orion after it splashes down in the Pacific Ocean when it returns from deep space exploration missions. A test version of Orion was used to evaluate recovery operations in various conditions. There are 2 more recovery tests planned for this series. On November 5th, our administrator Jim Bridenstine gave keynote remarks at National Geographic Society headquarters in Washington, D.C. before a showing of the Project Mars competition's short films and National Geographic's Mars series. During his remarks, Bridenstine talked about our InSight mission scheduled to land on the Red Planet November 26th.
This InSight lander is critical to a future human exploration activity.
Hey, you're watching NASA TV, on the air and online every day, on this planet and beyond.
This is Mission Control Houston. Good morning. Today is November 17th, 2018. You are looking at a view of the launch pad of the Cygnus cargo craft, Northrop Grumman's CRS-10 mission on top of an Antares rocket from Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. We are awaiting the launch of this cargo craft coming up in just about 30 minutes. Everything looking good for launch so far. Here in Mission Control Houston, we are working in tandem with Flight Control Facility over in Dulles, Virginia, Northrop Grumman facilities. In the room here, Flight Director Greg Whitney leading the teams and communicating with the Dulles flight controllers over in Virginia, over at the Northrop Grumman Flight Control Center. Visiting vehicle officer actually doing the communication is Tom Castleberry today.
LCTD on countdown 1.
That's again here in the room. Meanwhile, the Launch Control Center over at Wallops is standing by waiting for an on-time launch scheduled for 3:01 a.m. Central Time today.
Copy that, FSL. Ops 1, your go for step 403.
Launch control teams looking at the pad. Everything's looking good so far.
FTSB external power on.
Not too long ago, the teams began loading liquid fuel into the Antares rocket. Liquid fuel is comprised of liquid oxygen and kerosene to fuel the two main engines of the first stage of the rocket. Again, scheduled to lift off today at 3:01 a.m. Central Time. It's a 5-minute launch window this morning. But so far, everything's looking good. The weather is fairly cold, but not too bad. Clear skies and 38 degrees Fahrenheit, just about 5 centigrade.
FTS A and B, internal power on, external power off. Time is 08:32:24.
And elect 1, verify FTS internal power.
And internal power is nominal.
Roger that, check 407.
You'll be hearing some cues from the Dulles the Northrop Grumman flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia, throughout the preparations today. There's a few milestones we're looking forward to. Again, the two liquid fuel engines are fueled.
+1, +2.
At about the T-20 mark, we'll begin a 10-minute hold. This is a buffer built in to look for any extra issues before they initiate the final countdown start at T-10.
And FSO, verify FTS arm indication.
The Cygnus vehicle on the top of the Antares rocket is loaded with just about 7,400 pounds of supplies, scientific investigations, food, and fuel.
And FSO, FTS arm indication.
Copy.
Again, a look from the pad, you're looking at some of the normal ducting of conditioned air that's being fed to the payload bay up top where the Cygnus sits, and also the first stage at the bottom. Just regulating the temperature, making sure we're going to be set for an on-time launch. Again, the conditions look pretty good today. We've delayed the launch for the past 2 days just for some inclement weather up in Virginia. Some high probability of violation for those 2 days, but today is looking fair, and all the teams have been undergoing a series of checks over the past few hours. Teams here in Mission Control Houston gave a go a while back, but should be conducting a final go, no-go poll. I think they've given the command just recently here, so they're just the flight control teams over in Dulles are undergoing the final steps before that 20-minute hold, or the 10-minute hold, starting at T-20. Series of milestones after that. Again, at T-10, we'll begin the final countdown. Then at about 3 minutes and 30 seconds before launch, there's something called Initiate Auto Sequence Handoff for Terminal Countdown. This will initiate the computers that take over for the final steps just before launch. If anything were to happen, they would restart this countdown back at 3 minutes 30 seconds, but again, there's a 5-minute window, nice buffer for us to get launched on time today. Tank pressurization at 40 seconds, and then it counts down to T-0 liftoff, where the first stage fires for about 4 minutes till main engine cutoff. Throughout that time, you'll be hearing performance calls from Northrop Grumman flight controllers in Dulles. Again, that fires for about 4 minutes, 3 minutes 35 seconds, and then there's a stage 1 separation. The vehicle itself will coast for a little bit before the fairing itself separates and reveals the Cygnus underneath. The interstage, just at the back, separates, and then stage 2 ignition begins. This burn is about 2 minutes and 30 seconds long, and is a solid rocket motor for that second stage. So the entire thing will burn out before another coast period of about 2 minutes. Cygnus will be one of 2 vehicles heading to the International Space Station. Just about 15 hours ago, the Progress 71 lifted off on the other side of the world from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. That happened at 12:14 p.m. Central Time yesterday. It's going to be a busy, high-traffic time over these next few days in space, with cargo going to the International Space Station. Again, Progress already on its way in orbit right now, looking for a rendezvous and docking this Sunday. That docking time will be at 1:30 p.m. Central Time, and then conveniently 15 hours later will be the rendezvous and capture of the Cygnus vehicle today. Aboard the International Space Station are the Expedition 57 crew, led by Alexander Gerst, commander of the Expedition 57, a European Space Agency astronaut. He's on board with Serena Aunin, Chancellor of NASA, and Sergei Prokopyev of Roscosmos. Once the Cygnus arrives in just about 2 days, it'll stay at the station until about the February time frame, where it will take several tons of trash away from the International Space Station and burn up in the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean, completing its mission. Today is November 17th, and we're waiting for the launch of the Cygnus cargo vehicle to the International Space Station. Rendezvous for the vehicle will be November 19th. On November 20th marks the 20th anniversary of the first element launch of the International Space Station. First element was launched on November 20th, 1998. That element was called Zarya, translates to sunrise in English. This was the first element of the International Space Station, a joint project between the U.S. and Russia, constructed in Russia. The module is also referred to as FGB, translated into English, stands out functional cargo block, provided the initial power and propulsion for some of the first modules of the International Space Station. Very shortly after STS-88 came up, led by the commander Bob Cabana, who entered the International Space Station for the first time at the same time with Sergei Krikalev. That was back in December of 1998. About 22 minutes until launch, still waiting for that about T-20 mark where we'll begin the initial hold period. Again, about 7,400 pounds of cargo on board. This is split up with a lot of science investigations, 2,300 pounds actually, of scientific investigations. A wide breadth of different types of science. There's a new facility called a refabricator that's going up on Cygnus today. It'll be demonstrating 3D printing and recycling technology, the first to demonstrate both on the International Space Station. Recycles waste plastic materials into high-quality 3D printer filament, providing the potential for sustainable fabrication, repair, and recycling capabilities on long-duration space missions. Astronauts also study themselves. There's one study called vection, which determines an astronaut's ability to visually interpret motion, orientation, and distance. It may be disrupted in a microgravity environment, how it may adapt, how it may change upon returning to Earth. Several other studies inside. Now, just under 21 minutes away from launch, we're going to stand by for confirmation of that holding period. Again, that's some extra buffer to work any last-minute issues that come before the final countdown start at T-minus 10. Again, this is the Launch Control Center over at Wallops, Virginia. We're working in tandem with them from here in Mission Control Houston, as well as Northrop Grumman Mission Control Center in Dulles, Virginia. Launch Control Center undergoing the last checks to make sure that the Cygnus vehicle on top of the Northrop Grumman Antares rocket will be lifting off on time today, scheduled for 3:01 a.m. Central Time. So we're in the holding period right now. Again, the Cygnus vehicle on top loaded with almost 7,400 pounds of cargo inside. The vehicle itself named after John Young. The vehicle is called the SS John Young, named after the late astronaut born in San Francisco, California. Became a fighter pilot and test pilot for the Navy before joining NASA, and is a veteran of 6 space flights on 3 different programs. His first flight was on Gemini 3 with Gus Grissom to test the Gemini spacecraft itself. And then he flew again on Gemini 10 with Mike Collins, tested rendezvous and close formation flying. This was all in preparation for some of the lunar missions, which he did fly on. He flew on Apollo 10 and 16. Apollo 10 he flew as command module pilot with Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan. This was the flight before the famous Apollo 11 that actually landed on the moon. But John Young did get his chance on Apollo 16. He landed on the moon with Charlie Duke, Ken Mattingly as the command module pilot orbiting above. John Young also flew on the very first maiden flight of the Space Shuttle STS-1 with Bob Crippen back in 1981. And his final flight was STS-9, where he served as spacecraft commander, and this was the first Space Lab mission. Northrop Grumman names the Cygnus vehicles after influential people in the spaceflight world. This mission dedicated to the late John Young. Northrop Grumman flight controllers going through the steps to get Cygnus ready for launch on time at 3:01 a.m. Central Time. There's going to be a series of milestones. Again, the final countdown start is at about T-minus 10. Right now, flight control is working to switch the vehicle to internal power. Just under 15 minutes away from launch. A few more minutes before we start that final countdown. Undergo the last series of checks before the auto sequence handoff for the terminal count at about T-minus 3 minutes 30 seconds. Inside the Cygnus vehicle on top, the very top of the Antares rocket now, is a series of experiments, food, and supplies for the astronauts currently aboard the International Space Station. Space Station now flying 259 statute miles over the South Atlantic Ocean. You're getting views of launch control centers and mission control centers around working together for this launch today. This is a view, balcony or overhead view of the Northrop Grumman Mission Control Center in Dulles, Virginia. Just before you were looking at the Launch Control Center on Wallops, Virginia, where the Cygnus vehicle sits poised on top of the Antares rocket ready for launch. We're getting readouts from those flight controllers over in Dulles, Virginia. Everything's looking nominal so far. Just under 13 minutes away from launch at this time. Lots of experiments on board with all different kinds of disciplines. We went over some experiments that are studying the astronauts themselves, as well as a new facility for fabricating 3D printed materials. There's another one looking at the solar system and stars, bringing stars inside the International Space Station. One experiment called EXIS, E-X-C-I-S-S, Experimental Chondrule Formation at the International Space Station. We'll be looking at high-energy, low-gravity foundry of the early solar system using automated cameras and a contained apparatus aboard the International Space Station. Many questions remain on how the dust originally created by star-based processes turned into intermediate-sized particles, which eventually becomes planets, moons, and other objects. This is a view of the pad, launch pad, where the Cygnus sits on top of the Antares rocket now. What you're seeing, the venting on the side, it's called ducting. It's conditioned air to regulate the temperature of the vehicle itself. It's currently loaded with some liquid fuel that includes liquid oxygen and kerosene. The conditioned air is there to regulate temperature of the payload cavity where Cygnus is, and also the Stage 1 core bays. Closing in on 10 minutes away from launch. There was a final poll for Northrop Grumman flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia. Again, we were here good. In Mission Control Houston, Northrop Grumman is go for launch. The final launch sequence will begin at T-minus 10 here in 3 seconds. So we're now in the middle of the final countdown sequence. There'll be a series of steps that the flight controllers will take before switching to auto sequence handoff to the terminal count. This is where the computers take over for the final steps before launch. That happens at about T-minus 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Great view of the upper portion of the rocket, the Cygnus fairing that houses the actual vehicle underneath. Northrop Grumman logo just there at the bottom. The fairing itself will actually separate after the first stage separates, 3 minutes 35 seconds into the flight. Again, after that stage 1 separation, there's going to be a very short coast period, and then the fairing will separate, revealing the Cygnus underneath. We're in the final countdown now, just 8 minutes to go until launch. 7,400 pounds of cargo at the top of the vehicle there, ready to go to the International Space Station. Again, 7,400 pounds of cargo, much of which is scientific investigations, 2,300 pounds to be exact. We've gone over several different disciplines that are on board, looking at different manufacturing capabilities, experiments looking at the astronauts themselves, as well as the cosmos. There's another experiment going on called the crystallization of LRRK2. This is a type of protein crystal. This particular protein crystal, or protein, LRRK2, is implicated in Parkinson's disease, but crystals of the protein growth on Earth are too small and compact to study. Detailed analysis of larger space-grown crystals can define the protein's exact shape and morphology and help scientists better understand the disease's pathology. Just a few of the many experiments going to the International Space Station now. We are just over 6 minutes away from launch. Teams in Dulles here, you can see the Northrop Grumman mission control team going through those last steps before launch. Just under 6 minutes away. The initiate auto sequence start is set to occur sometime around 3 minutes 30 seconds before launch. Computers will take over and bring us to the launch at 3:01 a.m. Central Time today. 4 minutes, 30 seconds to launch. Vehicle on internal power. Now going to initiate auto sequence start here at 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Everything looking good so far. The flight control teams in Dulles, Virginia reporting normal calls. Everything is set, ready to go for an on-time launch today. Now just about 3 minutes from launch. Got confirmation that auto sequence has now started. We're now in the terminal count before liftoff today, scheduled for 3:01 a.m. Central Time. Just under 2.5 minutes to take off.
And passing T-minus 2 minutes, 20 seconds mark.
ISS charging nominal.
You're now hearing performance calls from Dulles flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia, Northrop Grumman flight controllers. Now under 2 minutes from launch.
2 minutes on my mark. Mark, Core 2, can you give me 467?
ISS actuator slew test initiated.
Core 1, can you give me 469?
LC Core 1, I cannot confirm that VTSO is open. VTSO is open based on temperatures.
Copy that. Core 2, can you give me 467?
Negative, LC. I cannot give you that. Negative, I don't have the telemetry to do that.
What step are we on? Launch team looking for an answer on 467, control to CSOE. T-minus 1 minute on my mark.
We can proceed, LC, if we don't have CSOE control will fail health checks.
Okay, copy that. We're going to go ahead and proceed. And Core 1, will you be able to give me a 474?
LC Core 1, no, I cannot confirm.
Okay, copy that. Ace, we're going to proceed.
Yeah, that's pre-waved.
And passing T-minus 30 seconds on my mark. Mark.
30 seconds to liftoff today. Northrop Grumman proceeding with launch on time.
Did you want to confirm the pressure on PSS and POS?
Mark.
We're now under 10 seconds from launch.
4, 3,
2, 1. Launch has been initiated.
And we have liftoff of the NG-10 mission, taking Cygnus to the ISS. We've got engines at full power and nominal attitude. Engine performance after startup looks nominal. Good avionics power, good TVC.
Good liftoff, and the Cygnus lighting up the night sky. Antares carrying Cygnus and 7,400 pounds of cargo, scientific experiments, food, and supplies to the International Space Station. Northrop Grumman reporting good calls on its way up.
TVC is nominal. Engines are powered back to 55% power. Altitude 15,000 feet, nominal attitude.
Everything good, looking good so far. Again, this first stage burns for about 3 minutes, 35 seconds.
Engines throttled up and operate nominally at full power. Attitude remains good. Just passing through 25,000 feet. Good TVC steering. Chamber pressures look good. Velocity passing through, and attitude looks good as we pass through max Q, and passing through altitude of 50,000 feet.
Max Q is maximum dynamic pressure against the vehicle. Passing through everything still looking good.
100% power. 5,000 feet per second. Altitude 75,000 feet. Engine operation remains nominal as we hit T plus 2 minutes. Avionics power looks good. Attitude remains nominal. Velocity 8,000 feet per second. Engine operation remains good. Attitude remains nominal, 125,000 feet altitude. Power systems look good. Pump speeds look good at 100% power. And we just passed 150,000 feet altitude.
Everything looking good. Now going to an animated view based on telemetry from Northrop Grumman. Just about a minute left of the first stage burning.
We've started our slow throttle ramp as we hit 200,000 feet altitude. And attitude is nominal as we approach T plus 180 seconds.
3 minutes into the flight, everything looking good so far.
Engine has completed throttle down to 55% power, and we're approximately 30 seconds from MECO. Attitude remains good, power looks good.
MECO is main engine cutoff. That'll be the end of the first stage, and then it'll separate.
Started our shutdown TVC slew. Attitude remains good. Engine performance looks nominal. And we have MECO.
Confirmation of main engine cutoff. Vehicle's now entering a
separation.
Good vehicle separation, now entering a coast phase.
And the lower attitude remains nominal.
Next step will be fairing separation.
We're about 30 seconds from
and interstage separation.
Attitude and power systems look nominal. At stage 1 delta V of 17,300 feet per second. And we have fairing separation and interstage separation, and attitude remains nominal. TVC battery initiated, and we have stage 2 ignition, and attitude remains nominal.
Solid rocket motor of the stage 2 is now lit.
Continues to look good.
This will burn for about 2 minutes 30 seconds until burnout. The entirety of the fuel will be used
around 800 psi
before another coast period.
Attitude remains nominal, and all vehicle systems are looking good at this time.
Nearly 5 minutes into the flight, everything looking good.
We've got approximately a 2.5-minute burn for the Castor 30 XL motor. Just past T plus 5 minutes. Attitude remains nominal.
5 minutes into the flight, vehicle exceeding 10,000 miles per hour.
Caster 30 continues to burn nominally, and attitude, vehicle attitude, and power systems look healthy at this point. Past T plus 5.5 minutes. Attitude remains nominal. Power systems look good. Caster 30 XL continues to burn under pressure just above 750 psi as we come up on T plus 6 minutes. Attitude and power still look good. All vehicle systems continue to look healthy at this time. Attitude still looks good.
Everything looking good so far. A few more seconds to complete the second stage burn.
Caster 30 motor pressures starting to decrease slightly in the expected burn profile. Attitude remains nominal. Power still looks good. Attitude remains nominal. Starting to slow tail off on the Caster 30 XL as we approach T plus 7 minutes. All vehicle systems continue to be healthy. And we've got stage 2 burnout at this time. Attitude is nominal. We'll now coast for 120 seconds prior to payload separation.
So the solid rocket motor for the second stage is complete.
ISS is disabled, and we're reorienting to the payload separation attitude. Attitude remains nominal.
It'll coast in this position for about 2 minutes before the Cygnus is separated from that second stage.
Signal stage 1 link.
Attitude remains nominal.
Again, everything looking good. So far, 7 minutes, 45 seconds into the flight.
To orient correctly for the Cygnus spacecraft separation event. Attitude remains nominal as we slew to the separation vector using the second stage attitude control system. Attitude remains nominal.
Just about 1 more minute of coasting before we separate from that second stage.
Power systems look good. Should be roughly 30 seconds from payload separation at this point. Attitude looks nominal, and the vehicle is oriented for spacecraft separation at this point. All vehicle systems continue to look healthy. We're just awaiting payload separation at this point as we are about 10 seconds away from T plus 9 minutes.
Just after T plus 9 minutes, will be spacecraft separation.
Vehicle attitude and all vehicle systems look good at this point. Power systems look good. And we've got Cygnus payload separation.
And confirm that the Cygnus has separated from that second stage.
Like we've got Cygnus injected to a nominal insertion orbit, and hope they've got a smooth trip the rest of the way to the ISS. A preliminary assessment, all of the orbit insertion parameters look very accurate and close to nominal expectations.
Some good words as Cygnus has made its way into orbit, a 9-minute climb to begin its journey, 2-day journey to the International Space Station. Some congratulatory handshakes here at the Wallops Launch Control Center in Wallops, Virginia.
Or losing signal on avionics link.
good calls from the Northrop Grumman flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia, on the ascent of Cygnus into orbit. The vehicle is in their hands now as it makes its two-day journey. There'll be a series of burns today and tomorrow, as well as into the morning of November 19th to get ready for capture on that morning. So an on-time launch this morning at 3:01 a.m. Central Time, 9-minute climb into orbit, and Cygnus is on its way with 7,400 pounds of cargo inside. Again, there's going to be a series of burns, but first we are waiting for solar array deployment. We'll actually take a short break before we do solar array deployment and come back on to cover that the two Ultraflex solar arrays have been unfurled and are getting some good power.
And site control, LC on countdown 1.
Go ahead, LC.
Yeah, 4E4, you can remove the aft bay G&2 flow and reconfigure for post-launch.
Aft bay G&2 flow off and ECS reconfigured for post-flight.
Okay, copy all there. Site control, go ahead and check 484 and core 1 LC, countdown 1. You can direct usually to power off for MSG.
And work.
Copy and work. And actually core 2 or go for 486 as well. They can power off their FMS as well.
Copy and work.
And Ops 1, step 47, deactivate arm enable and verify.
LC Ops 1, arm enable, key rotated, indicator deilluminated.
Copy that. Then can you disable local launch enable button at the failsafe panel and verify indicator extinguished?
Copy that, LC. Local launch enable removed, indicator extinguished.
Roger that. GSO, you can disable your local launch enable button and verify indicators extinguished.
Local launch enable removed, illuminator extinguished.
Copy that, GSO. And Ops 2, can I get a read back on ground Mach volts and currents?
LC Ops 2, ground Mach power supply voltage is 27.97. Power supply current is 0.6.
So a great liftoff of the Cygnus cargo vehicle on top of the Antares launch vehicle from Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. Teams working together to watch Cygnus delivers over just about 7,400 pounds of cargo into orbit. Now the International Space Station, flying 256 statute miles, just over Australia right now. Cygnus not far behind. A few vehicles in orbit, Cygnus being one of them, looking for a 2-day rendezvous to the station, arriving on Monday morning. Also in orbit now is the Progress 71 vehicle, launched from Baikonur Cosmodrome yesterday, and will be arriving tomorrow. But the journey is not over for the first steps of Cygnus. Again, we're going to take a short break and then come back to cover the deployment of those solar arrays to make sure that it is gathering enough power to do those series of burn commands until its capture Monday morning. We'll take a short break here. So in the meantime, this is Mission Control Houston.